Our job in the museum, but as historians also, is to bring value to the past.
These paintings are not history, they're the present. Artists make things whose value is subject to dispute.
Why do this? There's no need. There's no need to do this. It's not practical, it's not necessary.
If you were to do this today, it would be scratching an itch we don't have.
It's already done.
If you could imagine watching this painting being paid, we'd be watching a dance. And if you imagine speeding it up, we'd be seeing.
Bienvenidos a una de nuestras conversaciones en el Prado. Welcome to our Prado Conversations. We have Alva Noë with us today. How are you? Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
He's a leading philosopher working on aesthetics, matters relating to the arts and images, among many other things. He's a professor at University of California, Berkeley. And what we have decided we're going to do is to ask each other about our mutual learnings, you standing in for a philosopher in general and for your own work, naturally, specifically. And then you'll be asking me about what we learn about art from art history and what we learn about art from philosophy. So wandering around here these last few days, you have been posing big questions. This is what I admire most, I think, from your field of knowledge, the idea that one walks up to life, to things, to artworks, with questions such as, why, something as basic as, why make this? And that can be answered with big words or with small specifics. What kind of knowledge does philosophy bring to art that is different from other kinds of knowledge?
That's a fantastic question. One of the things I want to share with you when I think about how to answer that, and this is not something that all philosophers would agree with me about. In fact, maybe most would disagree. But it's an important truth, which is that philosophy really is one of the arts. And one way I'd like to bring that out is, if you think about the natural sciences, the experimental sciences, they agree on their findings. Communities unify around results, and then one lab produces a result and then gives it to the next lab, which takes it to the next stage. They not only agree on results, they agree on methods for evaluating whether the results are the right results. And if you think about it, that's just not the case, and it's never been the case with philosophy. Philosophy seems to thrive on a conversation that never resolves into findings. Philosophy is, it can seem a kind of standoff between these monumental intellects, never finding agreement. And then that raises the question, which is a question that Plato himself asked in his dialogue Meno: how can this work be valuable? What could the value be of a science that produces no positive finding, no agreement, not even anything recognizable as consensus? And his discovery, and I think it's a profound insight, his discovery was that the value doesn't consist in the result, it's the work itself. It's the ongoing open-ended conversation itself. Why is that valuable? Because it utterly changes us. It's not as though you're the same when it's over as it was when you began. The philosopher is creating a kind of space for a kind of transformation that lets the landscape, in this case, the intellectual problems that we might have about freedom or about value or about free will, about virtue, about justice, the landscape looks different at the end of the conversation than at the start. So we talk for an hour, you don't convince me, I don't convince you, there's nothing like settled agreement, and yet we both have a different relationship to the problem that we started with, which is to say we've both been changed. So I say this because one of the interesting things about philosophy is that in the culture at large, it's a little suspect. The government says, why should we fund students to study philosophy? How's that gonna contribute to the gross national product of the economy? How's that going to change the world? How's that going to solve any practical problems? And that suspectness of philosophy is, I think, something that philosophy shares with art. Art is very similar. Everything I've just said about philosophy in a way goes for the arts. Artists make things whose value of its very nature is subject to dispute, to disagreement, to puzzlement. We look at a painting like these paintings around us and we say, what are these? What are these? Why did anybody make this? What were they doing in making it? I'm not denying that as a matter of fact, we do all value this. But the question is, what is this and what is the source of its value?
Why does it matter?
Why does it matter?
Yeah.
Why in the world does it matter? Exactly the same question arises for philosophy. And so I say that because as a philosopher, you say, what does philosophy bring to this? In a way, what I want to say is philosophy is a sister undertaking, and philosophy is preoccupied, as is art, with this question of what am I doing? Another interesting thing about philosophy and art in comparison, this is kind of a trivial point, but it's so striking, is that art and philosophy are always seeking to renew themselves, always seeking the next way forward, the next program, the next. So it's like it's revolution without pause.
Let me throw in a couple of things. One, and I think you make a very important point that I would like to further emphasize. I think society in general often comes to philosophy looking for answers.
Yeah.
And that's more self-help.
Yeah.
Philosophy poses questions. There's a popular program on TV in Spain now where you have a philosopher together with journalists and other people, and he's providing these final finishing statements as if they were capable of bringing security to our lives. And I think it's just the wrong approach to philosophy. It's about questions. And maybe that's why there's such a sense of epiphany when one reads philosophy, because you're constantly moving on to the next question, the next question. Another thing I wanted to add, you have worked a lot on an idea that I find very fruitful, easy to understand and useful, which is the idea that we advance, we human beings, artists also, in response to difficulty. And your metaphor is that we have like a little pebble in our shoe, and that makes us walk differently. And what do we do now? What do we do with this? At every step, life is a problem. And what I want to say is that I asked the wrong question at the beginning, something different from what I had in mind, and it led to a very interesting thought. Instead of asking what philosophy says about art, which has provided a very interesting answer, I think, from you, what I had in mind, and it's an example of a difficulty that we need to react to, is what kind of knowledge does art bring to our lives that is different from practical knowledge, even philosophical knowledge, scientific knowledge, other things. Because I do think, why can one spend one's life studying these things? They do bring something that we're capable of connecting to, but it's very hard to put it into words.
That's beautiful. Two brief preliminary comments before I get to the heart of your question. James Baldwin, the American writer, he said, and this is an inexact quotation, the aim of the arts is to uncover the questions that have been hidden by the answers. And I think that goes for philosophy too. The aim of philosophy, the aim of art and philosophy, is to uncover the questions that we don't even notice because we're so convinced we know what the facts are. And the other is this, the pebble in the shoe image is very important to me. It was a philosopher named Hans Jonas, a 20th century philosopher, who said that irritation is the atom of having a world, which means to say irritation is the germ of consciousness itself.
Without it, we wouldn't notice. We wouldn't even self-reflect or reflect about things.
I think it's, one of the, this is a topic for another day, but one of the profound questions that we still don't fully comprehend to the bottom the answer of is the nature of life itself. And one of Jonas's thoughts, I think, is that life is a creative response to irritation. And irritation is not necessarily a negative thing. I mean, I have an itch on my arm and I scratch it. That's a kind of a positive loop. You know, something irritated me and I responded to it. I shifted my position. I reoriented myself in the world. But let me come back to your question. Actually, I'm gonna answer I'm gonna pose another question. Not just what knowledge does art bring, but why is it that this painting, for example, is one that you can look at again and again and again and again and again? It's a finite thing. And you know, you've looked at it under a microscope, you've looked at it under infrared, you've looked at it with probably every expert for the last hundreds of years. And why is it that this object, which it is in the end, it's an object, it's a thing, why is it that this object sustains an unending conversation? And not just, I mean, that's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And in some sense, this thing, let me offer you this. This is an opportunity. That's what this is. Bruegel and Rubens gave us an opportunity to throw the best that we've got at it, to ask it the hardest questions we can think to answer, to express our truest curiosities. And they may be the simple curiosities of, what is this? Why does, you know, what's going on here? What does this have to do with touch? This is el tacto. What's going on here? But that's just the beginning of a conversation. And I ask you, and then you answer me. And this becomes, I don't think this is a trivializing point, but there's a sense in which this is a prop for our growth.
Yeah, part of the answer also would be, and this has to do with what you just said, is our will. Why does this continue to provide stimulation for us century after century? In part it's because we wanted to.
Yes, that's true.
We decide it will. We come in here with goodwill. We want to believe in art.
That's true.
And once we do, we make comparisons, and some hold our attention longer than others do. But a lot of it is in us. You've spoken about this, and philosophy in general has. There are a lot of other answers, and they all pile on top of each other. One of the great things about art, I think, is that answers, you just mentioned this, they don't invalidate each other. They just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The big difference between the arts and the sciences, I think, in the sciences, a theory invalidates a previous one. I think Einstein invalidates Newton, perhaps. I don't know enough about that. Rembrandt doesn't make Jan Bruegel invalid. In that way, it's a different kind of knowledge. But I think you made this point of how important it is to understand that this is a prop only in the sense that it means it's really in us and how we relate to it. That seems to be where the core of the aesthetic experience resides.
So let me offer you another thought, and this is actually something I think you and I have talked about before, but here's an experience I've had, and I bet everybody watching this conversation and joining us in this conversation has experienced as well. You come into a room like this in a museum, and the wall is covered with paintings, and you glance at them and you sort of say, oh yes, okay. They all kind of look vaguely, stylistically the same, and you take a selfie maybe. Actually, we're not allowed to take photographs in the Prado, but in most museums you take a selfie in front of the famous picture and you walk on. And there's a way in which, although you optically saw everything in the room, experientially you saw nothing. You saw without seeing, you were there without being there. The works were there, but they never showed up for you. And what I call aesthetic experience is whatever it is that you do to move from that state of kind of numb blindness to actually having an experience, to actually seeing the work. And it's an extraordinary thing. And in my experience, in my personal experience, and this is related to some questions I want to ask you, in my experience, that's a very social process. I'm often in the gallery with somebody who already knows the work, for example, you, and you call my attention. Did you notice this?
Yeah.
Did you notice how these plants were rendered? Or did you notice that, whatever it might be? And all of a sudden, by your gesture, you say, did you notice this? And you point something out to me. Then it's there for me and lets me start my own dialogue with the painting. And before I know it, 10 paintings that all kind of look the same.
Suddenly.
Each one has its own, not just a face, it has depth. And it's a two-dimensional canvas. And through looking at it, it jumps into depth. It reveals itself as having hidden secrets. That is an extraordinary phenomenon. Now let me make a couple of statements before I be quiet and let you respond. Quite apart from the individual specific artworks, I think part of what makes art valuable as a human project is that it gives us the opportunity not just to make that passage from not seeing to seeing, or from seeing to seeing differently, or from not being present to being present, but it kind of lets us catch ourselves in the very act of doing it. And that work, catching yourself in the act of knowing the world around you, that's a fundamental insight into human consciousness.
Let me ask you something about what you just said. I find the idea that to name that moment, that time that passes from walking into a gallery, seeing paintings, not knowing what to do with them, someone tells you they're from a certain time and place, and you're like, well, so what? That doesn't seem that much. To finding meaning based on information. You call that the aesthetic experience, and I think that's illuminating. It works for me. But I have a problem with undoing what the term meant before that, which is that moment of epiphany that I feel every time I'm in front of a great work of art that I already knew and understood. And that it's a physical experience almost. It's a moment of great excitement. So I almost feel like we should have two different terms, because they're different things, are they not?
So, in a way, if I understand you correctly, you're asking, what about that experience of pure pleasure that you get through...
Which is even physically moving at times.
Which is physically moving.
Yeah. A sense of inner longing, of a will to come closer. You want to... one reaction to that is you learn everything you can. You make it yours by doing that.
Yeah. Which goes back to something you were saying before. I mean, you talked about the will to keep these paintings at the focus of our attention. That's a loving act. That's a decision that I'm going to nurture, I'm going to care. And this museum, a museum like the Prado, what is it? But it's a home, it's not a warehouse.
That's right.
It's more like a family of people devoted to the lives of these objects and to giving people the resources they need so that they have the will to see these objects. It's a kind of an amazing, it's a profound project. But I actually think that, and this might be my weakness, but as a philosopher and as a human being, I'll just say it. Life is hard for me. Seeing things is hard for me. I experience the attainment of pleasure as not something that comes just for the price of walking into the room and looking. No, I need to shut down the distractions, the noise, the things that are getting in the way of my being here now with you. You know, ego, all the different things that are going on. What happened to me yesterday, what's going to happen to me later on this afternoon. So to really tune out and turn on to the work itself is, for me, and maybe it's not for everybody, but for me, that's a kind of spiritual task. And I think it's a valuable task, but it is a task. And I need to somehow do that task before I get to the state where I have that epiphany that you're talking about. And then now the next time I come back, I bootstrap on where I was before. I start where I was. Right. And then I start where I was again. And then I bring a friend. And then, you know, like I was here in this gallery with you a few days ago. Then I came back with some other friends and they called my attention to totally different things. And then all of that is kind of feeding into my relationship with this work.
You know, a problem that I have sometimes, a beautiful problem I would say that relates to what you're saying, is that I would say that when I run into works that I see, if not daily, several times a week, that I really admire, that I find great, that's a bad word. One would need to explain what it means, but one could in this case. Or when I climb a mountain or go up to a beautiful mountain. The problem that emerges in my life is I only want the best once I've seen it. So I do find that happiness, that special spiritual experience, but once you've found it only at the highest peak, Nothing else will do. That's a different kind of difficulty from the one you're mentioning, but it is one nonetheless. And I run into it all the time. Tomorrow I'm going away for the weekend. I just want to go to the most beautiful spot in the most beautiful forest in northern Spain. And nothing else will do, and if I don't find that, I'll be frustrated and disappointed.
That's a beautiful idea. I'm very different in the sense that I feel the humblest place offers something if you can figure out how to see it. You know, there's a proverb which I used as the epigram for one of my books, which is, if you want to see something new, walk the same path every day. And I actually, to me, that's not a moralistic statement. That's a kind of truth, that it's so easy not to see what is there. Now, you're very refined in your knowledge and sensibility, so it may be that you really just are in a different place from me, but I bet that there's not a single painting in this museum that we couldn't spend a lifetime studying.
Absolutely, we could do that with every painting. Hearing us somewhat part ways on this now, I remember the fact that these aren't competing truths or attitudes. They're different attitudes that pile up, and they both should enrich a listener or a viewer who has goodwill and who wants to believe.
I'm not disagreeing with you. We're in a conversation is like a dance. Philosophy is like, we're doing philosophy now. This is philosophy. We're posing questions and we're exploring the spaces in which we can offer answers. A question that I found myself thinking about as I think about you and your work, this museum and its work, is the following. Let me try to articulate the question carefully. History concerns itself with the past, but it concerns itself with the past from the standpoint of the present. How did we get here? Or what is the meaning of the past for us? Now, that takes a very vivid form in art history, because in a way, you don't care about how these paintings came to exist in a neutral way, as you might care about how that person's shoes came to exist. No, you value these paintings now, in the present, and you're concerned with how they came to be, with their history, with the cultural and social and material and intellectual and scientific conditions that made them possible, has everything to do with then, here, now. So these paintings are not history, they're the present. So what is your work as an art historian? How do you weigh past and present?
That brings me to several answers, of course. One of them is that you make a point that I like to make, so thank you for that, which is that our job in the museum, but as historians also, is to bring value to the past, or to make us look at the past and find value in it. Another way of saying that is, I rather travel there than have the past come to me. It's a more exciting trip. I learn more about ourselves, human beings, what we all are, when I think about how things were in a different place and in a different time. And I would have been like them, and therefore I become less judgmental if I think, well, I would have been like them too, if I think they were terrible in some way. So that's one thing. Learning from virtues that existed in the past that could have been mine, I would have been like them, etc. That's a big point. And I'm talking about virtues because I'm talking about, you know, one of the things that we do that's best about us, art. That's maybe a lesson that I had never thought about that in the context of these works of art. But they have value in part precisely because they come from the past. And see, what I learn about here is that if I think about this idea, about this long path, is that these paintings are the result of a very long conversation that you have illuminated in part. What people are trying to do, what they can do, what their culture allows them to do, what their historical context allows them to do, what technology allows them to do. And they're doing that with the will of being different from what has been done, or different enough, somewhat different, Artists want to do something that's different from what has been done. We're all like that. That's one of the ways in which we evolve as people. We don't dress the same way as people younger than us do. They don't want to be like us entirely. So art has evolved with this sense of, I want to be a little bit different, but also with a great sense of we're links in a long chain.
Yes.
And up until the 20th century, calling attention to that chain was an important thing. A quote from Leonardo, a quote from Michelangelo, a quote from an ancient statue, as if to say, I'm part of that tradition, I'm adding on to it. What we see here that I think is so unique, and in the end, I was thinking about what we had said earlier, in the end, it's very hard for me not to think something that doesn't make a lot of sense, which is the value is there. I mean, these works are incredible.
They speak for themselves.
They're incredible. And what do I mean by that? Jan Bruegel the Elder, for example, he is the son of one of the great painters in all of European history, Peter Bruegel the Elder. Again, that word great, we would need more time to elaborate on it. It would need to be defined, but everybody would agree on this. His father dies when he's only one. He is taught by his maternal grandmother, a woman called Meiken Verhulst. She's a miniature painter. We don't know any works by her, but this is one of the most exacting, demanding forms of art that have existed in Europe, very high-end in the 15th and 16th century, very especially in the southern Netherlands or Spanish Netherlands or Belgium, which is what we call it now. So he's trained in this very high-end context, family context, as high as it can be. Then he goes to Italy to study and to get better, stays there for over 6 years, goes to Naples, works there, goes to Rome, works for Ascanio Colonna, important cardinal in the papal court, high-end patron, goes to Milan, works for Federico Borromeo, very high-end patron as well, comes back to the Spanish Netherlands, to Brussels, Antwerp, becomes court painter for rulers, one of whom is Isabel Clara Eugenia, daughter of Philip II, King of Spain, who in the second half of the 16th century has had the largest collection of paintings in Europe. So you can't be in a more demanding context than he is. If you add to that personal will, again, vocation, the sense that one is in a context that is incredibly demanding of one. You have to produce something at a level of quality that's hard to imagine. Think of the fact that Fra Angelico, Roger van der Weyden, Jan van Eyck, these people are 200 years before her. Art has been that good for that long. After all this happens, you have personal will. There's no need, perhaps, to be quite this good. Very few artworks are at this level when you get really close, when you see how calligraphy defines a certain sense of empathy with materials, for example. There's a picture in which Isabel Clara Eugenia is portrayed. We saw it yesterday downstairs in the Prado now. Belongs to the Rubens house in Antwerp. She, this very high-end ruler, is holding a little flower painting by Jan Bruegel in her hands. That's how she looks at it. He paints in the sense of sight in this very room. He paints a picture in a frame, and there's a magnifying glass leaning on the frame. That's how you look. You're looking at beauty, art, you're also looking at quality. Look how good this is. So I think in a case like this, time met a context, but then the personal came in, the will to be that great. Maybe we could call that talent. I'm not sure that word is a little hard to define. An interesting comparison that we talked about yesterday a bit is his son, Jan Bruegel the Younger, inherits his workshop, 1625, when his father has died. He's in his early 20s. Same context, not quite as good. It's a matter of standards if you compare it. What do I mean by not quite as good? I think I mean a few less minutes at every little stroke, a few less hours at every painting. Why is that? Well, whatever the reason is that makes me appreciate this, it may have to do with the market. It may be enough for him to make a good living to work a little bit less than this man was working earlier. But I've gone a little bit away from your question, but the idea of the will to be astoundingly good at whatever one does is a great lesson that comes from them as well.
Can I just jump in right there? Because it's interesting how, and this is going to be kind of a way of articulating maybe a disagreement, you're sort of taking for granted a standard of excellence and saying that, well, the younger Jan wasn't as good as the older Jan. He didn't work hard enough in the way the virtue manifests itself a little bit less perfectly in him. Is it possible that he was asking different questions, and that, or maybe not him, but other artists, questions shift. So there's probably nobody in the, if you think of the greats of 20th century art, there's nobody probably among the greats of 20th century art whose work exhibits this kind of exactitude.
There's no need for that
There's
anymore.
no need for it.
Right.
That's exactly the right question. Yeah. Now, why is that? How is it that the cultural circumstances mean that in a way there's, I mean, if you were to do this today, it would be scratching an itch we don't have.
It's already done.
It's already done, but...
Scratching an itch you don't have. I love that. That's exactly what it would be.
It would be scratching an itch we don't have. So what is it about? Can we get a little bit more specific? What is it about this time and this place and these people that made this necessary? That made this the scratching of an itch? It's not just that it's detailed and very, I mean, there's like the subject matter, and the self-consciousness. Let me just make one point which you know, but maybe the guests who are joining us, each one of these pictures has within it, among many, many other details, lots and lots of other pictures. So it seems to me that whatever the telling of the story of these paintings is, it's going to be in part a telling of the story that these paintings are telling us about these other paintings and these other artists and these other art teachers.
Very good point. Again, one thing that I should have added, this is what happens when one has knowledge and one presumes others do too, and the public in general, but you know, you've been writing a lot about this. We need to bring information and knowledge to others. Jan Bruegel the Younger does versions of his father's paintings. So he's not doing something different. He's doing the same thing, but a little bit, just a tiny little bit less time, I think, less will, less. He doesn't need to, perhaps. I think he could have done it, I think. I really don't think I think talent means effort, will, time, in this case.
It's not just skill, it's having the value.
So it's a different thing from Franz Klein not wanting to do this anymore. Jan Bruegel the Younger is doing the same kind of thing, but a little bit less well. You're talking about, you were asking about the pictures that are in here and values in this kind of work. And earlier we talked about the past. One thing that this illuminates, Jan Bruegel is that good because he really is focused on the past. He is unusually, Rubens, his friend, isn't like this, Titian isn't like this, others aren't like this. He is less of an innovator than other artists are. He is trying to keep alive a tradition, the tradition of very calligraphic, miniature painting done with tiny little brushes that you look at with a magnifying glass. So he really is saying, you know, artists usually want to run forward. I'm staying behind. I want to look at the past, and that's something he does bring to us. I remember when studying in college in Madrid, an accepted value of art was that it was modern. If an artist was very modern for his time, that made him good. If he was not, that made him less good. Jan Bruegel is a problem for that view of art. He's telling us people thought the aesthetics of miniature painting were finished. I'm going to stay with them. And they could have gone a lot further. So that talks about the kind of information that one needs to know to give value to these works that we're looking at here. So they are a form of reflection about art in this way, very much so. He would have been as excited, deeply, deeply excited to look at a Jan van Eyck miniature made in the 1420s as you and I would now. But that's the art that he's trying to prolong.
Interesting.
Also, I come back to the idea of context. What makes this possible? These things are made for very high-end rulers. They're made 16, 17, 18. They're in the King of Spain's small library, they call it, in the royal palace by 1634. Pretty quickly they made it into Madrid. And they're there as real treasures. They're hanging next to works by Dürer and others, things you looked at closely. Why do this? This is a very good sentence, I find, to answer my questions. there's no need. There's no need to do this. It's not practical. It's not necessary. It's one of our great qualities as human beings that we do this and we appreciate it, that we have done it. I mean, here I'm claiming merit that belongs to others, but of course, great artists of the past, but there's no need for this, really. And yet, it is one of the greatest things that we have produced.
One thing that, listening to you, and this is going to be kind of a free association, and kind of an ahistorical point, but when you were describing the small brushes and the really refined miniature attention, it made me realize that these objects, we live in the digital age, we just look at that, we see an image, but actually every single thing we see there is the trace of a human movement. It's if you could imagine watching this painting being paid, we'd be watching a dance. And if you imagine speeding it up, we'd be seeing, this most minute thing. And I wonder, and this is just a kind of a speculation, but I wonder if one of the things that turns us on now is, if that activates us, this is, to use an expression used the other day in the conversations with me, this too is an action painting. All paintings are action paintings. And for us to, again, if you just walk through the gallery and you don't pay attention, you don't. But if you try to fathom the mystery, which is the fact that this exists, you need to do a whole kind of bodily gymnastics.
Yeah, it's interesting you say this, because I do think it's a good way of seeing this again, a way that's illuminating, that brings something to one if one hasn't thought about it, is that it's action. It's also a still image, a very unique thing.
Yes.
We don't usually run into forms of art or other things where we can stand here 10 seconds or 10 hours if we want. This is still.
Yeah.
I think we are going to leave it here, Alba. I think it's been a great conversation. We've been going on for a while, but I am so thankful. I mean, I find it so stimulating to read your books. Entanglement, the last one you published, and the last one I've read, but also simply to, you're a philosopher, so the idea of questions that stack on top of each other, and all of which are productive, but also your curiosity and your energy, your intellectual energy is very special. So I thank you for being with us for a few days, for having this conversation, and I look forward to more, of course.
You're welcome. I look forward to more too. Thank you.
Thank you very much.